Welcome, welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. Awesome. We're going to get started in another minute or two. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. We would love to know who is here, where you are dialing in from. Awesome. Awesome. Welcome, Laura. Thanks for being here. Awesome.
I see familiar faces, familiar names and new names. Welcome, everyone. Feel free to put your name and where you're dialing in from, as Kelly said in the chat. We're excited to spend the next hour with you or whatever time you have for this lunchtime. For most of us, maybe not all of us.
Awesome. We're gonna get ready to get started, and I'm gonna share my screen, and we're gonna ask the tech gods to be with us today. Thanks for being here, Stephanie, Crystal, Brooke. Awesome. All right. Thank you all for being here. My name is Kelly King Jackson, she, her, hers, and my co-conspirator in all things justice and Texas. You want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Kelly. Hi, everyone. My name is María Fernández with Destino Strategy Consulting, dialing in from San Antonio.
Awesome. We're going to hop in. We're going to get you out on time. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for spending your lunch hour with us. I'm going to just set the stage, and then Maria and I will more formally introduce ourselves. So we consider this a conversation, and so we want you to be active in the chat. Let us know when you have questions. You want to pause us. We are recording this, but we're recording this for our purposes, so you will not see your face on the interwebs. This is really for us to be able to share some of our perspective and to also do some learning. So please know that this is a safe space for you to talk about what's going on in your organization, and we promise not to out you on the interwebs. And then we have some resources. So we have some resources that we have added to the deck, and we will be following up with y'all to make sure that you have access to all of those. Anything I'm missing, Maria, before we move forward? All right. So let's do a little bit of introductions. If you're just joining, we would love for you to introduce yourself in the chat, where you are watching from, and the name of your organization. I'm Kelly King Jackson again. I am a leadership coach and strategist. Most of my practice is split pretty evenly between philanthropy and nonprofit. I'm mostly working with leaders who are doing their work in the US South. All right, Maria.
Mhm. Thank you, Kelly. Again, my name is María Fernández with Destino Strategy Consulting, and I consider myself an organizational and a strategy consultant. So anything that will help get you from your vision to action, which is strategic planning, governance, leadership, and really thinking around for our conversation today around governance and leadership and what that looks like. Kelli and I both also do facilitation because that's the process and the how we support our clients. And so, yeah, excited to be here.
Awesome. Let's go ahead and hop into our next slide. Okay, let's talk a little bit about, sorry, y'all, I think I took us a little bit too far. One second, y'all. All right. So we know that y'all are carrying a lot right now. And oftentimes you're carrying it alone due to circumstance, or maybe how you work, right? Maybe you're that leader who is like, my board chair has a lot going on, my staff is overtaxed, and I'm going to figure this out. And so this hour is to really hold space for what you all are carrying as leaders of very important work, particularly because most of our folks who are dialing in are from Texas, and we know that it has been a extremely difficult time to do the important work that y'all have been doing. So let's talk a little bit about our agreements today. We would love for you to speak from your own experience. So a good I statement is welcome and will be well received here. We'd love for you to listen to understand, right? You will have your experience, and then there is a larger collective experience of what's happening in the ecosystem. And so we want you to think about and sit with spaces where you may be feeling uncomfortable. We invite you to engage across difference. There are organizations of different sizes and experience that are here, and we want to hold curiosity and care with each other. What is shared here stays here. The lessons leave or travel out. So we want you to share the lessons that you're taking away with your board, with other executive directors as you are doing the important work. Make room for other voices. So I love a good step forward, step back. So if you tend to be shy and more introspective, we want to hear from you. What are you sitting with? What are you noodling on? What's percolating for you? If you're someone who loves to jump in and you hate silence, we're going to invite you to pause a beat and make space for others to make their voices heard in the space. And then we want you to bring your full self. One thing that both Maria and I value as practitioners is that we work with clients who have a similar or shared lived experience in this work. And so we don't have to mask here. Here is where we can be truth tellers and witness bearers for the experience that folks are having. So you are welcome. And if you agree to our agreements, we would love for you to comment in the chat, give us a thumbs up. If you have an agreement you would like to add, we invite you to drop that in the chat as well. Maria, how's that chat looking?
I'm seeing thumbs ups.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Good, good, good. Awesome. I'll move us forward. Okay. And so there are four tensions that we have been seeing as practitioners, and we want to know if you are affirming. We would love for you to put the number of the tension that is most present for you today. So the first that we're going to discuss is around role and power confusion. The second is around strategy without having a partnership. Particularly today, talking about a partnership between the board chair and the executive leader of the organization. That there's an avoidance of accountability. There's some things that we are thinking, but we are not saying to each other. And then the fourth is this complicated relationship that many of us have around money. And so it is often a discomfort or a tension, sometimes a fear or a trauma that can sit with folks. And so we'd love to hear of these four tensions, which feels most present for you in your work right now. And I'm gonna be a big girl, Maria, and see if I can figure out how to also see the chat. But we'd love to see your number in the chat.
Okay, let me know if you see it, but I'm seeing a 4 so far.
Okay.
Maybe a 4, another maybe 4. Cool.
Okay. I see a 1.
Uh-huh.
All right. Any others? Okay, a 2. Ginger, yes, we're talking about the board and the executive relationship, the executive director or CEO relationship. Okay. Awesome. Anyone else want to chime in? All right. Okay, 1. All right. Okay. Well, we're gonna move into number 1 now. So let's talk a little about it. So when we think about role and power confusion, sometimes it's the board chair who's acting like a member of staff. It could be a transition in leadership that's happening. The ED is over there, underwater, right? They're like, I can't take it anymore, and so the board chair has stepped in and is functioning as a quasi staff member. Sometimes, and I've been this board member where we are rubber stamping things and say if the ED says it's amazing, we say it's amazing, right? We're not actually governing, we're not asking the questions about capacity, about budget, about where we are in the ecosystem. Um, my new favorite, too many hands in the masa that leads to decision bottlenecks, right? Um, I don't know about you, but my grandmother is very clear about her kitchen. I do not have a role in her cooking. I can be the sous chef, right? I can chop, I can do those things, I can set the table, but she is very clear that she is the chef. And so sometimes because we have so many people touching the work, it makes it very difficult to get decisions to be made. And then the other is around unrealistic expectations. And we see this especially for new leaders of color, particularly if it's new leaders of color coming into leadership behind a white leader, that they expect magic, right? Executive directors are often feeling like they got to make it rain, right? They got to bring in all the money. They have to keep all the people coming to the programs. They got to keep staff excited. And so the board chair sometimes in that doesn't really know what their role is. They want to be supportive, but they're not really sure how they can be supportive. And so they're kind of sitting there with their hands up, like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I just had someone tell me I'm on this board, but I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. I don't know how to help. And so my recommendation was ask the ED what they need. How about we start there? But when we don't have good role descriptions, terms of engagement, I love a good board agreement. It can make it really difficult for folks to have clarity on the role. Anything you want to chime in here, Maria, and stop me. I'm going off my other device, so I think I'm on target, but if I am not, let me know.
Oh,
Yeah.
all good, Kelly.
Anything else you want to chime in on role confusion or double tap? Okay. Awesome. I will move us on to our next slide. So, our question for y'all, and feel free to unmute or put in the chat, where have you felt role confusion as the board chair or as the ED? Now, if you haven't shared this with each other, we're going to give each other grace today. But we would love to hear where folks are feeling some role confusion on what they are supposed to be doing as the board chair or the executive director right now. Don't be shy.
And maybe this is also a space where maybe you went through that stage and now you are in a different place. So what helped address that confusion? That might be helpful for other folks in. So feel free to, if some things work for you, feel free to share. But oh, I'm seeing one here. Maybe final decision making strategically. Okay.
Thank you for that, Ginger. Yes, is this my final decision to make as the board chair, or is this something the EDU decides? Go ahead, Brady. I saw you unmute.
I was gonna say, just knowing who's owning what, and so just taking a step aside to identify, like, okay, I'm taking ownership of this, and asking the board chair to take ownership of this, and really having that open communication to determine what those things are.
Yeah. Ooh, Sandra, my favorite question. What role should an ED have in regards to board meetings? I have lots of strong thoughts about this. I would love to hear from some of y'all before I chime in on how you're navigating this in terms of clarity of role. And maybe how is it now and how do you think it should be for your organization? I see you thinking, Sandra. You could just unmute.
So for me, the way it's worked here for years is that I usually am the one, we're a smaller organization, but typically I set up or I create the agenda with the board chair, whoever the board chair is. Sometimes they have input, sometimes they don't. And then I, of course, kind of send off all the reports that need to be sent out for the board meetings. Sometimes it's helping the board chairs run the meeting. You name it, I've done it. I've never had clear, um, I guess, clear responsibilities of what my role should be, right? Preparing for board meetings, but even during the board meeting as well. I mean, I know I have some idea. But it continues to happen at times, depending on who the board chair is, right? And I think there's others that have been in the same place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that, Sandra. I see Ginger is seconding what you said. I have been there. I think sometimes what I've heard from executive directors is my board chair is super busy, and so I don't want to add to their plate, even though they too are super busy, right? And so I think even if it's a negotiation to say, our team at the nonprofit will set up the meetings, but we need you as the board chair to get with the exec committee if you have one to set the agendas. We'll take the minutes, like really having some intentional conversations about how the tasks are negotiated and delegated so that nothing gets left off, right? That, oh, we forgot to do such and such because we haven't identified. You'll see, as even as Maria and I have prepared this presentation, Maria's name is on some slides, my name is on some slides, so that we were clear on who was trying to hold the work as we move through the presentation. So even that level of delegation can make meetings run much smoother. Yeah. Maria, what were you going to chime in?
Yes, I see this very often, and I heard from another consultant with some of my board training journey talk about if you had a guest come to your board meeting and they walked in the room, who would they think is in charge of that meeting? And if they think it's the ED, then that's a conversation between the board chair and the ED. Right? Because in those spaces, it really is the board chair that is holding and stewarding the work together with the board of what's happening in those conversations, right? So if the ED is a person meeting, if the ED is the person who's running the meeting, right? That really is, like you were saying, Kelly, it is a conversation between the board chair because that really is that role. And so shaping the meeting, shaping the agenda, definitely a shared responsibility. Sometimes it makes sense that, right, the ED, you know the details of what's happening, but really those board conversations are really strategic conversations. So you really need the brains of the ED who knows the day-to-day and the board chair who has the pulse of what's happening on the board to really shape those agendas in a way that's going to have meaningful strategic conversations and not just updates. So that'll get to one of the second lessons, but definitely just that real clear alignment between the two of you, what that role is. And you're right, sometimes it, you know, a board chair may come for certain skills that you're looking for, but really facilitating and moving that work forward and being the one who is having hard conversations with the peers and not putting the ED in the position to problem solve relations with the board. Those are some of the role pieces that are really important.
Yes. And if this is new to you or you're like, oh shit, it's okay, right? That's why we're here today. We're here to talk about the reality, right? Like you may not feel like you all are set up yet to do that. And so we are here to help you start to think through some of that. Maria, I'm gonna go ahead and move us on to our next slide.
Perfect. Thank you, Kelly. And this is a natural transition from the last questions you're all asking. So this one is about strategy without partnership. So when you go back and think about the role of the board and the executive director, really the board, you're working with the board to set that strategic direction. That may look like a strategic plan. That may look like agreeing on some key priorities. But really the work of the board is to ensure that it's happening and is holding the organization accountable for the results of that implementation of the strategy, right? So that is their governance role. The role of the executive director and the staff is alignment with that and then making it happen, right? Leading the implementation. And so the first point is around situations where the board may approve a plan, a strategic plan of priorities, and then disappears. We see that really often in strategic planning. Some of the things related to that is when I was coaching and working with executive directors, this happened a lot during COVID, right? Either board members were having their own situations, stay at home, they couldn't commit the same amount of time and intensity to serving on the board, or just didn't know what to do. And they're like, ED, you got it. We trust you. And the ED is like, wait, crickets, what's going on? This is where I need your strategic guidance. Like, do we keep going forward? Are there opportunities? How do we manage the big questions and the tensions about what this means for our work? So that's something that we tend to see. The second one is too few or too infrequent chair ED check-ins. There's been a couple situations where I've heard executive directors say, so I ask this question when I'm working with the board and say, how often do you meet with your executive director or your board chair? And responses that I often get from EDs is, well, we text all the time. We're in communication all the time. We text together. We're in constant communication. And so for when I hear that, one of the questions is, so are you doing governance or are you doing management? Right? If the board chair and the ED are in constant communication every day, maybe sometimes there may be a crisis and you're trying to problem solve a thing. That makes total sense. But the value of really having dedicated time, be it monthly, every other week, whatever that looks like, where you are really thinking about strategy. You're both are setting time aside, you're not multitasking, and really thinking about where's the direction that we're going in, what are opportunities, what are board blocks, what things do we need to bring to the board? Those are really important. And then that relates again to the mission creep under funding pressure. Again, we thought it was timely to have this conversation because a lot of organizations are facing financial pressures. And it can be really easy to say, well, you know, this is kind of related to what we do. Maybe we should explore this funding source, or this foundation is opening up their grant making areas we've never applied before, but I think there's a way this could fit. And so it's a way, like, caringly to hold each other accountable for really aligning what funding you're seeking with your mission. And then the last one is a pretty plan on the shelf that nobody uses. So again, the strategic plan or the priorities that you've set, the role of the board is to ensure that that everyone is aligned, that as an organization, you're aligned on where you're going, and that you're having those regular check-ins and revisiting what's different, what's the same. But it really is the role of the executive director and their team to then put it into practice. How is that showing up in people's job responsibilities and goals, right? Do you have not just a plan, but an implementation plan? And how often are you revisiting that? So those pieces are pretty important. So the question we have for y'all is, we can start here, but anything that resonated for you, how often do your board chair and ED actually meet? You can drop that in the chat. And then more fundamentally is, how do you feel those are going? Do you feel that you're focusing on the right things when you meet that are really advancing your work forward? Okay. There's no formula here. There's no right answer either. I'm not
There
looking
is
for
none.
Kelli,
Sandra
anything
said
else?
Sandra says they meet
Okay.
every other week.
Okay, great. Yeah.
My last board chair experience, I had a monthly meeting with the ED on the calendar. We just set it for the year.
Mhm.
Set it and forget it.
Same. Okay.
I'd say here that for the last 6 months, this time has been spent in sustainability planning, really crisis mode. And dually, we're, trying to plan for like a transformational strategic plan in 2027.
Okay.
But really, these calls have been mostly focused on crisis management and sustainability in the absence of federal funding that we may lose. So,
Yeah.
Mhm.
Ginger, you're not alone, and I'm glad to know that y'all are actually using your time in that way. There's a lot of EDs who are doing that alone and not in partnership with their board right now. So good to hear. Any
Yeah, I
others?
love that. Just you're focusing on the big questions, and how you're responding to those. And I think the more you can scenario plan and anticipate some of those things, right? You're constantly focusing on that. So that's really good. That's a great example. Also see in the chat again. So a lot of times this also, especially in these times, it's not only the executive director, but that leadership team, right? People in director roles really sharing that work together. So I'm reading in the chat about having honest conversations, right? About what's going well, what needs work, and what's important for reporting. And that's seems to have been an example, extremely helpful during that transition, is kind of the green light, red light, yellow light, and everyone really having a pulse check of like, what's urgent, what's going forward, and then what are some of the big questions we need to be problem solving. So I love that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome. I'll move us to our next
Mhm.
slide. All right. So my favorite. I love a good loving accountability. And so number three is around how we avoid accountability. And so one way that this shows up is not having an executive director assessment process. It is very important for your executive director to get helpful feedback on what is working and what can be strengthened in their leadership. I have a client right now who says my board assessment is not helpful. Everyone's like, "Oh, you're doing a great job," and she's like, "That's not helping me grow as a leader. Like, what are the things that are working about my leadership, and what do they want to see different? What are my opportunities to stretch myself?" And so she is actually yearning for better feedback. Succession planning kicked down the road. I had a former client, reach out this week to say they were on medical leave. And all I thought about was we were working on succession planning, but it was such a low priority that we never actually got to it, right? We got to the strategic plan, we got to the team development plan, we got to the fundraising plan, but we never got to the succession plan. And this is a medical leave, right? So this isn't someone who's like, oh, I got recruited for another role. This is something that can happen literally overnight and completely unearth and disrupt what some beautiful work that is happening. And so succession planning, we often see getting kicked down the road. We keep postponing the hard conversations, right? We know those two or three board members who haven't shown up for anything, they haven't met their annual contribution, and no one wants to say anything, right? We are tiptoeing around it. Everyone, I don't have capacity to deal with that right now, right? But it's having an impact on your board. And then the other is around fundraising plans that aren't realistic to the capacity of the organization, right? We're going to apply for, 100 grants. We're going to knock it out. We're going to buckle down and get it done. And the board chair is not asking the question of the ED is like, what do you really have the capacity to hold? And then how do we level set with the board on what's realistic for us this year? Um, Anything you want to chime in, Maria, before we get to our big question?
The last piece here on this, Kelly, is that one of the things that has been wonderful working with Kelly on different projects in the past almost 2 years is I'm kind of seen as, Kelly is like a straight talker. And then I was like, maybe I wiggle around some things. But, as I think about these topics, I think part of what we're trying to have this conversation is to normalize a little bit of some of the pain points. So, you get this deck and you see something here that resonates and you want to, this is an opener for a conversation you've been meaning to have, either as a board chair with your executive director or vice versa. Feel free to tap into this as like, hey, I just went to this, like, what's landing for you? Do you recognize anything here that we want to talk about? And then, that could be a conversation starter too.
Yeah. Awesome. So our question for you, what's the conversation that you've been avoiding? We don't have to name any names, but what are the topics that you see that maybe it's a pattern in the culture of your board that you've been avoiding? And I'll also name sometimes avoidance isn't conscious. So maybe it's something that's popped up for you today and you're like, huh, I hadn't really thought of that as avoidance. Maria, do you have any examples that I did not give that you want to lift up?
Conversations. We had started talking a little bit as maybe if there is interest around the next one is conversations around engagement of other board members. And sometimes feeling that, well, if we have more than half who are actively engaged or 2/3, we can kind of avoid the one board member who maybe isn't showing up or is not contributing in the ways that we want. And um, sometimes it's because there may be avoidance from the board chair to have that conversation, right? Because there is a power dynamic also of, it's a conversation for the ED to be having with the board member. That's where sometimes it isn't always clear, to be fair to the board chairs, that is part of their role, is that they are that peer to the board member to have that conversation. It isn't, a lot of times things fall on the executive director to have to problem solve, but really is that conversation between the ED and the board chair to have that first conversation with the other board member. So that's when I see very often is like thinking we can keep moving with a critical mass of board members, but other board members see, right? They see that, and that's demoralizing. It's like it happens with our staff, right? When we see certain things happening with a staff member that aren't being corrected and aren't being addressed. So I see that quite a bit.
Yeah.
And how to do that. It's not easy, right? But really, that's why you need each other to think through how you do that.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I often say that, oh, it's gone. Battery and power. Oh, wait, it came back.
We hear you.
We hear you, Brandy.
Like it just went blank. I was getting ready to go plug in. I often say that my board is as good as I am. And so when I am on it and I am following up and I am calling and I am checking in, they are always actively involved in that process. And I wondered if there's a space where there's some shared responsibility for the board chair to also make sure that I am held accountable and do what I'm supposed to do.
Or, thank you for that naming that, Brandy. And I think even a simple question of, Brandy, I haven't heard from you. How are y'all doing over there? Right? Like, are y'all okay? Are you underwater? Is there anything that you need from us to be able to support you right now? Because I've noticed I haven't received an update or whatever the thing is that you feel like you haven't delivered to the board. Thank you for naming that. Yeah. And that's why we talk about this as a relationship, right? Like we need each other to be our best. And I think sometimes folks don't want to overstep, or again, back to the role clear confusion, they're not clear that that's what their role is. And so then nothing actually gets done. And so even asking the question, is this something I'm supposed to be doing? Because it's not getting done can help move some work forward. Yeah. All right. I'm gonna move us to our next point, my one of my faves. And so let's talk a little bit about this complicated relationship with money. We call this the elephant in the room, right? This is the story we're all tiptoeing around. Um, One I hear often is board members who hesitate to make the ask. Even when they have resources, they're like, I don't want to ask my friends for money. Or I actually just had a person join our giving circle who said something similar. She was like, you can ask me to do anything, but one thing that I hate to do is to ask other people for resources. And part of our job as board members is to help raise resources for the organization, to raise the visibility of the profile of the organization so that more folks will donate. And one of the reasons I think that this often happens is because we come into rooms and spaces with our own money trauma and money stories that are relevant to the boardroom and out, right? I have lots of thoughts about asking people for money. I don't want to feel like I'm begging. I'm thinking about what it was like when we didn't have a lot of money. All of those things can deeply impact how people raise resources. I've been working with a high net worth wealth donor, right? So this is a woman with a lot of means, and one of the things she said was, "I have some baggage around being a woman who inherited money." Right? I would have never thought about that. But if we weren't talking about it and creating this space for her to do her own learning, then we wouldn't have known that this was a barrier for her. And so that unspoken money trauma is something that we see coming up time and time again. The other is around not adequately training our boards, right? So we leave fundraising as an optional training instead of something foundational that we actually do every year, right? So every year we have a touch point on a new approach to fundraising, strengthening the skills of the board to be able to fundraise, and that we have some relationships, whether that's with your grant writer, your development director, bringing in an outside consultant, but actually doing the skill building so people both have the skill and also understand the importance of doing this work. And then the piece that can be really hard for the EDs is that the task on raising resources is theirs alone, or it feels like it's theirs alone. And in this current climate of fundraising, that is a lot of pressure. It is a lot of pressure. And so, as we think about it, it's like, how do we change our mindset around some of this so that we don't think about bothering folks, but we think about how are we inviting people in our network to have an impact around an issue that I care deeply about, right? You said yes to this board position because you care about this topic. And this is an opportunity for you to identify other folks in your network who equally care or who trust you enough to say, if Sandra cares about this, let me pay attention, right? Let me ask some questions and think about what is happening in that work. So our question for y'all around this money piece is, what is your board's relationship with money and fundraising right now? Okay, Ginger said all of the examples we provided. Okay. Any others? Y'all rolling in the dough. I love it.
I think, Kelly,
Yeah.
this doesn't answer the question, but I'm wondering how often are you seeing board members feeling like, well, are board members being recruited onto a board with unclear expectations of fundraising? And then what about the expectation that every board member is able to fundraise, has the network, has the wealth to donate?
Ooh, I'm sorry, I couldn't see who was speaking. Who was speaking?
This is Laura Chang.
Hi, Laura.
Hi.
Laura. So a couple things come to mind. One, I find that many boards, particularly mid and small organizations, the role is not clear around fundraising. In larger boards, there's a real clear, like we recruit you on this board with a give expectation of at least 1,000 or at least 5,000. Some of the big organizations even more. Like they are very clear. I've seen other folks who say, we want our folks to buy at least one table at our annual event, right? But those tend to be larger, more capacity organizations where they have a development staff who's thinking about those things and has a board strategy around fundraising. I will say for the smaller groups, it is typically the ED who is left doing a lot of that work. I've heard smaller organization executive directors tell me, well, my board is built of community members, right? They don't have the resources to raise money. And if that is the governance model of the organization, then there's always the opportunity to have an advisory board who does that, right? And they are the folks who are largely raising the resources because your board is mostly made of folks with lived experience. And also, there is still an opportunity for folks who don't feel like they have a network of folks to get raise money from to also contribute to an organization, right? Maybe these won't be your $1,000 a month gifts, but they could be your $25 a month gifts or your $50 a month gifts. Maria and I were just talking in our prep call. I was like, the number of organizations that I give $25 to $50 a month to, people would be surprised, right? But I often don't get asked to donate as a woman of color in leadership. And so it's a really fascinating space that there are many people like me who will give in that dollar amount who aren't asked because everyone's only focused on the $1,000 givers and up. And so, how do we also talk about the diversity of donors and the opportunity to engage community as a part of resourcing our work? Yeah. Maria,
Yeah.
what else would you add?
Oh, that's a great question, Laura. I think what's landing for me, what you said, Kelly, is expectations. Like expectations, because I've seen a whole range of organizations from some that have a minimum $1,000 contributions, right? And again, that's strategic decisions you're making about who that's including and who's it's excluding. And also there is a real there are clear expectations. So we can drop it and we can add it to the deck. Kelly, there's that, I know we've both seen it. There's one example of kind of some organizations can do like a staged, kind of like 3 boxes. One is like minimum expectation, right? Your expectation is for fundraising is that you attend at least one event for the organization every year, that you make a contribution to the organization every year, financial contribution, and that you tell 3 other people about the organization. Then that's minimum expectation.
Yeah.
Exceeds expectation is that, these other things. You attend 4 events during the year, you make at least this contribution, and then like exceptional participation, right? So there's a way to have that conversation, and for that board, it's super clear. And there isn't a hierarchy, and we know that there's different levels of giving, there's different ways people can contribute. And then that connects with the whole idea. It's like, it could be a final contribution, but at a minimum, like, is there a willingness to connect to other people who can give? And it doesn't always have to be the wealthy folks to do that. I was sharing with Kelly, is like last month, we're on the struggle bus in some way or another. Consultants are a little on the struggle bus right now. And last month, I was like, I gave to 3 organizations. I gave to 1 local elected candidate and 2 small grassroots organizations, one of them a mutual aid organization. I don't know that I have tons of disposable income right now. And so I paused to think about, well, why did I give? One is I have a relationship. And yes, I believe in the mission, but I believe in the mission of all the organizations I work with.
Yeah.
But the third one that you said, Kelly, is they asked me. They asked
Yeah.
me. And I have a relationship with that I trust that my $25, my $50 is going to go to really good work. So I love
Yeah.
that point too, of just being asked. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a client who did something similar. She said our fundraising consultant said we should reach out to all of our consultants to see if they would be interested in being a sponsor of our event. I looked at the sponsor deck that they sent. I was like, I could do 250. Right? I really believe in their mission, particularly right now, the work they're doing in Texas. And okay, put my logo on your step and repeat. Absolutely. I would love to give to that, right? And so again, she was never going to ask me to give, but because there was someone whose job was to think about it, right? She was able to make the ask. And I could even read it in her thing. She was like, ugh, they asked me to ask you, but I know you don't have any money, was kind of the energy I was getting underneath it. But she was able to get a gift because of that. And I probably wouldn't have given otherwise, but I was invited to be a partner and to make that investment. So yeah, thank you for lifting that up, Maria. Any others folks want to lift up around fundraising? I think this speaks to some of what we said, speaks to Ginger, your Sandra, to your point around folks who don't know how to fundraise. There's some great fundraisers in our communities. We had one who came and did some work with the cohort Maria and I were working with, and she was very energetic. We had a little call and response, right? She was like, what are the money messages you've received as a child, right? Money is the root of all evil. More money, more problems, right? You could hear people just name them. And when we have that mindset, what does that mean, right? About our ability to go and ask and bring resources into the community. So they were getting a live training that then they could take back to their teams and be able to try to encourage and develop the fundraising muscle of the folks that are on the board. And for us to think about when we set our roles and our expectations, that fundraising it can be a part of that, but that we will do our part to give you the skills and the information, the toolkits, the language to be able to send that out to your networks. Anything else here before I move us forward? All right.
Okay, Kelly. So kind of tying it all up, we could go on for days on a lot of these topics, and we've talked about some of the challenges, but just wanted to kind of leave with, again, thinking about what does it look like when you do have a good partnership, and maybe there's some things that you already see here that are already working. And so the first one is trust, right? The trust to say the hard things. And that's about communication, right? And transparency and not letting things fester. It's always harder to solve the thing once it's become a big thing than when it was a small thing. So transparency, again, no surprises in either direction. I know we talked about it, annual evaluations, but when there's feedback there, I try not to say the word should, but there really shouldn't be surprises about areas of growth for the board chair or the board, or also for the ED. And so again, that connects to regular communication, accountability, and having those conversations. The shared vision, again, is, are we all clear on the direction that we're going? A lot of that, you can't have accountability without knowing what success looks like and having the same vision of, the same agreement on what those priorities are. At the same time, having some flexibility in trying to, find new ways of doing things. And that also builds on the other things. It builds on trust and evolves on knowing our roles, and then having a good container or sandbox that we know kind of the parameters in which we're working. I love this one too, the modeling. Staff watch how you two work or not. I've worked with organizations where the staff doesn't even know who's on the board. And that may be saying some things, right? Is your board showing up at events? Is your board visible? Not that they're at every meeting or event that you're doing, but that can be telling. Or some of the more challenging situations I've seen is where, because we are stressed, because we may not always feel aligned with the board, where we as an ED may, actually, I worked for an organization like this. I'll say very personally, this wasn't a consulting, is where the executive director would make the board the bad guy. So when there were things that weren't going well, they would say, well, the board is making me do this. The board is asking me to do this, right? So what does that model and set for your team, right? To not show up and demonstrate a little bit of that accountability that happens. So, and then retention, I mean, in a way, it's the result of what happens where you are aligned. And so when these things aren't happening, again, we see burnout. It may show up with the ED, it may show up with the board chair, it may show up with the board.
Yeah.
Sometimes it cascades and you see it with your staff. That may be some of the early places where you start to see the impact of it. It's not always even with the ED first. So again, Kelli and I were talking about, really the takeaways here is, we all bring kind of our own ingredients and our own contributions, but we're all making the same dish. We're all moving in that same direction.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So we wanted to leave y'all with some actionable things, right? So we just curated a couple questions and we're going to send you all the slide deck. But here are some questions that you all can use for your next board ED conversation, moving y'all beyond programmatic updates, right? The best board that I was on gave me a board book that had programmatic updates. We did high level, couple bullets in the meeting, but then we got into big picture. What does this mean about our strategic plan? What are we hearing from our funders? What prospects can we be helping nurture to move us towards our big goals? Because I felt like I was actually making a difference in the board, right? And so these questions around these four areas are designed so that you all can get to the heart of the matter and really strengthen and expand your board chair executive director relationship on your roles, your strategy, your accountability, and on the resources that are necessary to do your work. Any questions about these questions and how you might use them? All right. So, go ahead.
Mention that this was helpful. I think been in on a lot of board meetings and all of those things. And what I like hearing is that there's a unique space for each board and how they operate. Because I think as a nonprofit leader, I've been told, like, if your board doesn't do this, they're not, a functioning board. And it appears, just listening to of being in this space, that there's some room for us to be able to create what works for the work. And so just wanted to name that. Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome.
Oh, I did have one other question though.
Yes.
Going back to that meeting structure,
Yes.
is there a best practice that you've noticed for meetings? And what does that look like?
For board meetings?
Yes.
Yes. So I think a not best practice is spending all the time on programs. Your programmatic update should be a really small part of your board meeting because really you're talking about strategy, you're talking about resources, you're talking about any kind of legal, HR kind of things that need to be discussed at a board level. Maria, any other things that are essential in a strong board meeting?
Yes, I think the biggest piece that we've talked about is really setting the core part of your meetings for strategic conversations. So I'm happy to plop in some questions we could put in our deck of what are the kinds of questions that would be good for a board to be asking? The other, a small but concrete one that I've had a couple organizations say has made a difference is moving the updates to the end, moving because at the end, if you run out, one of the things that a lot of our boards say is we run out of time. And so if you have like updates at the end and you run out, and then those can go in an email, you realize those can go in an email. The 20 minutes you've been spending at the beginning of your meeting sharing updates, and then you're like, oh yeah, you can just get them. They're not core to having a strategic conversation. Then leave them at the end, and if it goes in an email, it goes in an email. And so that's been a time saver for folks. That's 20 minutes you can get back for real conversation. Mm-hmm.
And I'll also want to name that for smaller orgs, it often they're leaning on their board for programmatic support and feedback. And that's often not the best way to use your board. So when we think about the different categories of board expertise that we encourage nonprofits to think about, right? We're talking about legal, we're talking about HR, we're talking about, a knowledge of the subject matter, et cetera, et cetera. And so we want to use their time to bring that expertise to the organization, right? You didn't usually pick your board members because they have programmatic expertise. And so I think we have to reverse how we utilize our boards to be able to really leverage their strengths to grow our work and our organizations. Yeah. We're almost there. Is there anything that we haven't named or anything else that's sitting with you to Brandy's question that others want to raise before we wrap up? All right. I know folks are headed out. We will follow up with sending you the slide deck. Please know that on the resources page, these are all active hyperlinks. So these are specific tools that we think will be helpful. We'll likely add an additional slide with some other resources based on the conversation today. I have, for example, a template on providing programmatic updates. So you could send that in advance and spend more time on some of the other elements of nonprofit best practice in your board meetings. And Maria, I'm sure, has some others they may want to add as well. Awesome. So, is this my slide, Maria, before I jump to you? Yes. So ways that we can support you moving forward. We do provide dyad coaching. So that's coaching with your executive director and board chair, where we would set some goals of how you all want to build your relationship together. We also provide board assessments, facilitation for board retreats, and other strategic facilitation that will allow your organization to strengthen their governance. We will be sending you a survey. We want to hear more about what you need as Maria and I continue to build out this work together. So I want to say thank you for your time, Maria. I know you want to chime in.
Yes, no, thank you. This has been really helpful to us, and stay tuned for more from us and these resources.
Awesome. Thank y'all for being here. If anyone has any other questions, please feel free to unmute or pop in the chat. Awesome. Thank you for being here.